Here's what might be surprising. The prophecies that are the most descriptive of the coming Messiah were not necessarily understood at all. Looking back into Isaiah from where we stand, there are some passages that are just so descriptive of Jesus that we wonder how they possibly could have been missed. But that's only because we know him. A police artist can do a decent job drawing a likeness of someone from a description. But in that situation, the artist wouldn't take a description over the phone and then post the result with any confidence whatsoever. The artist would insist that the person who knew what the one being drawn looked like should be there to say, well, yes, that looks just like him, or no, a little wider at the nose, or whatever. Well, it's only because we have seen the Messiah as he really was that we have an advantage over the Jews of his day as we look at the prophecies about him. One passage that the Jews did not clearly associate with the Messiah was Isaiah 53. But to us, Isaiah 53 is a crystal clear message about the man and his method. The man they expected, the mission they understood, but this message about him and his method was missed as they pored over the Old Testament prophecies looking for prophecies about the Messiah. Well, why was that? It was because from their perspective, it was so unlikely. Salvation by grace through faith in a crucified, buried, and risen Christ? Jesus' own disciples certainly didn't expect this. Look at Mark 16 after the resurrection, when they first got this unbelievable report. After Jesus rose from the dead early on Sunday morning, the first person who saw him was Mary Magdalene, the woman from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went to the disciples who were grieving and weeping and told them what had happened. But when she told them that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they didn't believe her. Afterward, he appeared in a different form to 2 of his followers who were walking from Jerusalem into the country. And they rushed back to tell the others, but no one believed them. Well, the problem was, no one would have come up with this idea on their own, this solution. If you had been given the problem that God had, what would you have done? I don't think you could have come up with this as a solution to the problem. What do I do about these people that I created with free will to do good and evil? Look at Isaiah 53, and what does God say that he will do about this problem? The entire passage covers this, but verse 1 of Isaiah 53 calls the whole idea unbelievable. Who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? God's plan for saving us is just almost unbelievable. This chapter in Isaiah goes on to explore the unlikeliness of the whole thing, and then to explain why it would happen and how it would end. Jesus' roots made him an unlikely Messiah. Jesus of Nazareth was an unlikely Messiah because of his earthly origin and nature. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Like a root out of dry ground. See, Galilee was not fertile soil in the Jewish way of thinking because it had no special religious or traditional significance. It didn't play in prophecy like Jerusalem or Bethel did. Now remember the problems that Jesus had with this in John's Gospel. In John 7, we can see the problem clearly. On hearing his words, some of the people said, "Surely this man is the prophet." Others said, "He is the Messiah." Still others asked, "How can the Messiah come from Galilee? Does not Scripture say that the Messiah will come from David's descendants and from Bethlehem, the town where David lived. Now, of course, we know that Jesus was from Bethlehem originally, but Galilee was the stumbling block that divided people in their responses to Jesus and the possibility of whether he really was the Messiah. It says also he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Jesus didn't look like a leader, apparently. I can hardly stand to watch most of the movies about Jesus because he's usually small and weakly in appearance, usually a little bit pale. And though that is unlikely, you know what? I think that what I want him to look like is no more likely. You know, it isn't handsomeness I want, just an appearance that would reflect his authority. You know, I want him to look like someone who would inspire confidence. Maybe I'm not all wrong, but according to Isaiah, whatever he looked like, his appearance was not magnetic. You didn't just look at him and want to follow him. It says he was despised and rejected by men. So yes, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on what is now called Palm Sunday, last Sunday, in the manner of one who was being anointed king. And the people called him king at that point. But it wasn't long before he was taken and mocked and beaten. And then when he stood there before the crowd that may have had many of the same people in it, and then he just took it, they despised him. He was just acting so weak and helpless. And so they rejected him. They said, we don't want him. Give us Barabbas. And if you realize what they were saying Barabbas, had led a revolt against the Romans. He had murdered some of them. In fact, he was a Messiah figure in their minds, in his mind, who wanted to overthrow the Roman rule. Well, Pilate gave the Jews a choice between the two Messiahs. And they rejected Jesus and elected Barabbas. Well, Jesus at this point was like a leper, one from whom men hide their faces. They didn't want their eyes to meet his, and so they turned the other way. We can be sure that no one brought their children to see Jesus during the trial or while he was on the cross. At that point, they would never have said, I hope you grow up to be like him. They were ashamed of him. He represented the latest feeble attempt by the Jews to fight the Roman oppressors. And so he had made them a laughingstock once again. So what did this accomplish? Why was it happening? Jesus was an unlikely man who was part of an unlikely plan. Jesus suffered because of our sickness, sorrow, and sin. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. This calls to my mind the invitation that Jesus made in Matthew 11 that we looked at a few weeks ago. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, how is Jesus' yoke easy and his burden light? This seems contradictory to some of Jesus' other sayings, like this one that appears in chapter 16 of Matthew. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Well, I can assure you that that isn't the easy yoke or the light burden that Jesus was talking about. Giving up his own life wasn't easy for Jesus, and it isn't easy for us to give ours up. But once we have given it up and entrusted our struggles to him, we do have an easy yoke and a light burden. It's not that the burden has actually changed. We've just turned most of it over to him. It's light and easy in comparison to the alternative because of the attitude of the boss. I've had held a lot of menial jobs in my life along the way, and none of them were particularly satisfying by themselves. In fact, some of them, you would say were sort of drudgery. But what made the difference as to whether I dreaded work every day, or whether I was able to take it in stride, was the atmosphere on the job. And that was determined largely by the attitude of the boss. I mean, if he was inconsiderate and selfish, worrying about how you made him look, even an easy job that paid well just wasn't worth keeping for long, at least in my mind. And on the other hand, if he had a cheerful and caring attitude, and I'm not talking about being lenient toward laziness, no matter how hard the work was, it was bearable because of his attitude. And it was especially helpful if he was willing to jump in and work alongside you. So another really helpful quality of a good boss is that he or she is not looking for a good reason to fire you. In fact, a good boss will find a way to help you be successful. When you struggle, they work with you and they even take up the slack if needed. So that's the kind of boss that Jesus is. And yet, we all like sheep have gone astray. Instead of firing us, however, Jesus actually takes the burden on himself to restore us to where we need to be. We take up our crosses with every intention of following him in a life of sacrifice. But from time to time, we all slip back into using people instead of serving them, and even abusing people instead of loving them. It's really easy to forget what life was like without Jesus and to slip into just trying to avoid all pain and suffering by whatever means necessary, even when that pain and suffering may be caused by meaningful sacrifice for others. So we do go astray. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Ask yourself this: if Jesus had spoken at his trial, what would he have said? If he had spoken at his trial, it would have been to condemn us. Someone was guilty. He was falsely accused. So to defend himself and show that he was not the guilty party would have turned the eyes of justice outward to find those who truly were guilty. Well, who was guilty? For whose sin was he being tried? Yours, mine, ours. We turn traitor on Jesus time after time, and he never opens his mouth to accuse us. Let's sing this song as we think about that.